distance themselves from McConnell. Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
All right, welcome to Kentucky's Voice, the daily program that talks about news and politics in the state of Kentucky and your local region from a conservative perspective. I'm your host today, Tom Fallbush, and we're going to talk about the Senate race, the who's going to replace Mitch McConnell. And as we all know, Mitch McConnell has been a long-standing senator in our state, and been in there since the '80s, and has done a lot of great work for the state. But as of late, as the Republican Party has turned into more of a populist conservative party, McConnell's, more establishment credentials have not aged well. Let's just say that. And there's a lot of pushback on McConnellism, I guess, if there is such a thing. So we're going to go through and handicap the race today. We're going to talk about who's running, who the candidates that might try to replace him, specifically on the Republican side, because it's just a red state. Chances are you're going to get a Republican primary. Well, whoever wins the Republican primary in the Senate race is probably going to be the winner of that seat. And so we'll focus in on that. But I'm going to do that today with a guest. His name is Andrew Phipps with Faith, Family, and Freedom. And Andrew is a longtime television host and political activist, and been involved in all things political and conservative and faith and family, pro family issues for quite a long time, and has local connections, families from Kentucky. He's based out of Muncie, Indiana, so definitely in the region. And Andrew, we're really privileged to have you today, because it's just good to have some perspective on this, because as I mentioned there in the open, this is an important seat. This is Mitch McConnell was the former Senate Majority Leader, and so he had a tremendous amount of power, tremendous amount of influence. Kentucky had a lot of influence, almost outsized for the size state it was, because of Mitch McConnell, and also even Rand Paul's got a lot of credibility. So it's those are big shoes to fill. However, Mitch has gone down this more establishment road, and it's really rubbed a lot of the Trump support, which is really the core base of the Republican Party, rubbed them very wrong. And so whatever candidate, it seems, Andrew, whoever candidate's running right now, if they were part of the Mitch McConnell world, which many of them were, because a lot of these guys came of age under the system that Mitch McConnell created in this state. Mitch McConnell basically built the Republican Party in this state. So they came of age in that system. But they're now starting to push back and say, well, I'm not McConnell. I'm more like Trump. And so it's a real interesting dynamic. And so have you noticed this? And what are some of your thoughts on McConnell and the legacy he leaves going into this election?
Well, Tom, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to be a part of your program. It is indeed an honor to be with you today, and perhaps to share some perspectives from my point of view. I do think that in politics, it's politics, they say, is always local. That's what former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, said. And it's transitional. A friend in politics can be a rarity. They say in Washington, D.C., that if you want to have a friend, get a dog. Well, it may be true. I think what we're seeing here as of late, and especially with the election of Donald Trump, we're seeing people that feel like that we have had a period of grace that has been given to us, maybe to once again tackle the issues that beset us. I think Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana said it well. The Democratic Party has become left of common sense 10 exits ago. Right. And the people have rejected the idea of same-sex marriage and transgender operations and no border security, the idea that socialism is the epitome, is the goal. And so consequently, I think in the coming primary here in the great Commonwealth state of Kentucky, I think from what I can see that I believe with the introduction of Congressman Andy Barr into that foray, I think we're going to see some new dynamics. I think it's going to be huge what I witnessed the other night.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into that when we talk about Andy Barr. That's yeah, he's definitely one of those that have thrown his hat into the ring, and so it's interesting you talked about the the Democratic Party in relation to this seat, and because I wanted to get this perspective from you. You know, what's happened over the past decade or so, really since Trump has gotten into the race, and even prior to that, honestly, during the Tea Party movement, what you saw is a development of a new type of politics in the country. Of course, you remember this back in the Reagan era. It was pretty much a left versus right sort of approach to politics. You had the Democrats who wanted big government, and the Republicans represented by Reagan who wanted small government and strong defense and family values, et cetera. So there's still a lot of that in the electorate at this point, but there seems to be a new twist into politics. It's more of a elites versus the population, and so more of a populist dynamic that's playing out. And so it's more about, and that's across parties. And so, for example, you've got the Democrats and the Republicans were very pro open borders for decades. Mm-hmm. And so, now you see somebody like Trump that comes in and says, listen, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, both of you guys are wrong. We need to create a new dynamic. And so that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this new, it's not left-right, it's top-bottom. Are you for the elites? Are you for the everyday American right. citizen? And so this it's really upending a lot of things. And for example, I'll tell people that were strong Democrats that are very suspicious of Donald Trump, and who were like, we just don't like him because he's abortion and all this stuff. And it's like, and I tell them, say, you do know who you're voting for, right? Donald Trump is basically Bill Clinton 2.0. I mean, mm-hmm. if you look at all of his policies per se, all of his rhetoric, especially when it comes to the economy and how he views government welfare, for example, it's Bill Clinton 2.0. And so you're not dealing with this left-right dynamic that we used to. It's more we have this elite that's sort of out of touch. They're self-serving, and the rest of the population, be it left or right, are responding with a new style of politics. And so it's, and you and I both, we've come through the era of both eras. We've witnessed the Reagan era where it was all about these socialist Democrats and all that. And let me say this: the Democrats still do have this left-wing radical, cultural politics, this LGBT stuff and all that, and all this radical Marxism, social, that is still a deep part of their base, and Trump has been smart to line up against that. So anyway, we got about a minute left. I'm sorry to eat up all the time. Love to hear your thoughts on that in a minute or less, and we'll come back after this break.
Well, Tom, Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president, said, to educate a man in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society. I think the present-day mantra of the Democrat Party has been to negate common sense, to tell the average citizen in America that border security is not important, that he shouldn't be able to own a gun and keep it in his house, that maybe he shouldn't be able to worship in the house of God. Yeah. And these kinds of things have really turned because Donald Trump, I do believe, loves America,
Yeah.
and he's spoken to the aspirations
That's right.
of the common people.
He absolutely does. And Democrats just want power, and you can just see it. We'll be right back. We're talking about the Senate race. Who's going to replace McConnell?
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
All right, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice, a daily program that discusses news and politics in Kentucky and this area from a conservative perspective. And, of course, on the screen here we have the one and only Mitch McConnell, the man himself. And very much an interesting conversation if you're a Republican in this state, because we've watched the Mitch McConnell era play out over the past, 4 decades, since the 1980s. And he's done really amazing work up until recently. I got to say this: if you're a Republican, you're concerned about especially pro-family and cultural issues, we wouldn't have had Roe v. Wade overturned if it wasn't for Mitch McConnell. And so, regardless of how you feel about his sort of anti-MAGA, credentials, which if you look at the show, look at right here in front of my computer, Trump, and I got the MAGA hat on. I'm MAGA, right? Okay, but I still appreciate Mitch McConnell's conservative, fight over throughout his career. But he's just somehow in the past few years, he just kind of lost his way, and I think he got a little bit of TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, got a little bit offended by the man, and you just see that happening. It becomes a personal thing, and then. And then plus he's just out of step with just the mood, the more conservative populist mood of the country now. And so, and I'm going to go back to our guest today. We've got Andrew Phipps from Faith and Family Freedom. We're discussing the Senate race. Who's going to replace Mitch McConnell, and what does it mean to have to be a Republican Senate candidate in this day and age when you have the new era of Trump? We're in the era of Trump now. This is not the Reagan. This is not the Reagan era. This isn't the Reagan Republican Party. This is the Trump Republican Party. So, and all the candidates realize that. Problem is, a lot of these candidates have roots in that McConnell Reagan era. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. So, anyway, I cut you. I didn't give you enough time last time, Andrew, to talk about this whole conservative populist versus establishment thing, but there is a difference. So there is a difference between the Republican Party 20 years ago, the Bush Republican Party, for example, versus the Trump Republican Party, but on pro-family issues, I can argue that Trump is better.
Absolutely, and I think Donald Trump is certainly singular in the aspect that he is no one's baby, no one's child, no one owns him, and so consequently, I think what he does it, I believe, because he loves America. I mean, a man with his means wouldn't have to take the hardest job in the world to spend his final years, so to speak. I think what we have seen over the course of time, culture consists of the arts, the literature, the music. Pat Buchanan made a great comment, Tom. He said, in half a lifetime, many Americans have seen their God dethroned, their values assaulted, their country invaded, and themselves demonized as bigots and extremists for holding on to beliefs that Americans have held for generations. And this vast swing in the attitudes, I think people are realizing today that there are absolutes, that you can't have everything on moral relativism. Yeah. And I'm going to say this, and I applaud and thank you for your comments, but I think the people now that would be in the Mitch McConnell camp have not realized and do not evidently maybe embrace the idea that we are in the midst now of a cultural revolution, a revolt.
That's right.
People are tired of folks having the government to try to have more dictates, more resolutions, more bureaucracy. Reagan said that some of the scariest words that you can hear is that we're here from the government and we're here to help.
Yeah.
And people have rejected that. And I think that what you're seeing with Trump is not beholden to the establishment. He could care less what the people in those positions say and think. I really believe that he's trying to apply business-like decisions and do what he thinks is best. And I think the cabinet that he has used, that cabinet wasn't selected based on some kind of social experiment. He has people in those positions, basically, that are either knowledgeable or are willing to learn and to listen to the path that Donald Trump is pursuing. And I think I think Mitch McConnell has had his day, and I'm not taking away everything that he did, especially with helping with more conservative justices. But I think today the people are demanding more in respect of accountability. The congressional approval in all of the polls is very, very low, and the Democrats are even lower.
Yeah.
And so, consequently, I think the people are wanting somebody. It doesn't have to be a fresh face as far as age, but
Right.
they're wanting somebody that will speak truth to error. You know, truth
Yeah.
becomes hate to
Yeah.
those who hate the truth. And I think
Yeah.
we're wanting people
Mm-hmm.
that will say, hey, this is how I see it. And I think people
Yeah.
respect that. Whether or not
They
they
absolutely do.
always agree, I think they respect it.
That's right. And let me go back to what you said earlier about we're in a revolution, and because that's really exactly what we're in. We're in a cultural revolutionary moment, and actually, I would redefine that slightly. I would say we're in a cultural counter-revolution. Counter-revolution, because, and that's why this whole conservative populist movement is important. That's why it is what it is, because what's happening is the population, the average person, that generally holds traditional values, because yeah, as you and I both know, reality is conservative, right? At the end of the day, the real world is a conservative perspective. You know, you can live in La La Land on a college campus or in some East End suburban gated community where you're just protected and you have a lot of wealth. You can live a little liberal life in that. But the real world is conservative, and there are consequences to your actions, and you got to so. The average everyday American holds these more conservative principles. And so we've seen over the past 30, 40 years a top-down cultural revolution that's been forced down the throat of Americans. We've been force-fed gay marriage. We've been force-fed all these liberal values from Hollywood and all these agendas, all this woke business. That's been all top-down, forced into down our throat. And finally, Americans have had enough. We've had enough on the cultural side, and we also had it on the economic side. We had enough of our jobs being shipped to China. We've had enough of our jobs being devalued because of immigrant labor. We've had enough of being told we're racist and we're sexist and we're homophobes. We've had enough, and so there's a counter-revolution, and it is as most counter-revolution you can see in any other political. Counter-revolution in the history of this world. America is basically regurgitating all this stuff, and the person leading that charge is Donald Trump, and God sent us that man. You know, for all his flaws, he's perfect for this moment, and he sent this country this man. And so you're spot
Tom,
on.
You have spoken well, and I thank you for your correction. It is a counter-culture revolution. You know, the American people are not embracing this idea that there are more than two genders. They are not embracing this idea that a man ought to be able to participate in ladies' sports. Like the January 6th thing, if the people that were sent to jail, if they are the perpetrators and they are the people that are to blame, why did Biden give pardons to the people investigating them?
Exactly.
So I think that you and I believe, are on the right track with this.
Absolutely.
I applaud your narrative there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, we promise we're gonna get into who's going to run against for McConnell's seat after this segment. So we'll be right back. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice. on the screen.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice Radio. We're going to be playing a video clip here. If you're listening to the radio, you can't see this, but this is a clip put out by the Saudi government of the trip that Donald Trump has made to the kingdom there a couple days ago, and it's just epic. You got to pull this up on YouTube and watch it. It's just the pomp and circumstance of these visits to the Middle East, I think, are second to none. It's just beautiful, and I play this because in this last segment, Andrew and I were talking about how the American public have rejected this woke narrative, all these values from the far left, that's, you know, these progressive values that the elites in the West have pushed down our throats. Well, guess who else have rejected those values and are sick of it as well? It's the rest of the world. The rest of the world hates this stuff too, right? And they're looking at America like, you guys used to be like the moral champions we all looked up to. You kind of defeated communism. You kind of, were, somebody we respected. But now you're pushing gay marriage on our conservative culture. What is wrong with you? We don't like you anymore. And so the rest of the world is so relieved to have, first of all, because the rest of the world needs America. They need us to be strong. They know we're a good, strong country, and they need us to help for just to stabilize the world in a lot of ways. But if we're pushing weird values that undermine their cultural heritage, then they're pushing it. So this trip to the Middle East, you can see this in these conservative Muslim countries, in the Gulf. They love Trump. They just love him. And so it is just fascinating to watch. I mean, for lots of reasons. I mean, culturally and militarily and politically, because they don't like the Iranians and all this stuff going on. But it's just neat to see the rest of the world really liking us again and on a deep level. And anyway, whatever. Okay, let's get back. I also want to mention our text line. We've got 502-571-0970. Text us. We'd love to hear your comments on what we're talking about. And I promise we're going to get to the candidates here in a second. So, Andrew, any thoughts on that? Andrew Phipps, our guest today, about the rest of the world.
I think, Tom, that as you have so well articulated, that the rest of the world know that we have a new sheriff in town, a new leader, and I think they respect him. They respect his business acumen. They respect his speaking with some authority. And, a leader has to show strength, or otherwise no one wants to follow him or her, as the case might be. Now, with what we're seeing today is, as you said a while ago, the counter-culture revolution is really in effect. And if anybody doesn't see that, I think they're going to be very highly dismayed with the result. And I think President Trump is leading that charge. And I think in Kentucky, we're going to see the evidence of that in the coming primary. The candidate that is most like Donald Trump and can gather some other support. And I don't want to jump ahead of you, but
no, I'm glad you did. Perfect segue. Yeah, let's jump into it. Go right ahead.
Well, last Monday night, I was in Somerset, Kentucky, at the Center for Rural Development. Some people call it the house that Hal built, and I'm referring to Harold Rogers, the congressman from the 5th District, and he's the dean of the House, and the Pulaski Republican Party, from what I could see, almost exclusively, I guess it was, endorsed Andy Barr. And I think this is going to be huge.
I've got some. Let me pause you there. I've got some video I'm going to play of Andy Barr, and just so let's just see what he has to say about.
We begin this morning with Congressman Andy Barr jumping into the race for Senator Mitch McConnell's seat. Barr says he believes Kentucky needs a strong conservative America First senator and wants to prove to the Commonwealth that he's that person for the job. Barr, who has held Kentucky's 6th district congressional seat since 2013, believes his track record in Congress not only positions him to perform well in the primary, but also to build the name recognition he needs to take on the race.
I know you. I know what Kentuckians care about. I know your dreams, your hopes, your aspirations, and yes, I know some of your frustrations as well. And I know for you, this is not about winning elections. This is about saving our country.
There we go. So there you go. So he's a brand people know, and he's been in politics, so people understand what he's about. And so what are your thoughts about Barr? Do you think he'd be a great replacement for McConnell?
I think so. And, I think, again, and I don't want to over magnify the importance of Harold Rogers, but also it cannot be understated. Hal will bring not only the clout that he has in the 5th district, and also he has, I'm sure, with his PACs being one time considered a cardinal chairman of the Appropriations Committee, that's what they call them. I think that he will be able to help probably monetarily with his support base. And I think it was mentioned the other night that, winning without the endorsement of the 5th district that votes about 70 to 80% every time for Harold Rogers and is also strong Trump country, I believe that this is going to be huge. I don't think I'm overstating it, Tom, to say that I believe this may be the kicker right here. I think that you can't overlook a man that's brought so much economic development to this district, and people, they love him. Whatever thoughts you have about term limits or whatever, they love him in this area.
I get a sense of that, and I think he's been a traditional Republican in a lot of ways. I think he has some establishment ties, but he has been leaning a lot more MAGA lately, and so I think he's a fine candidate. I would kind of put him in the middle of the pack, though. I don't know if I would put him as a front runner just yet, but I'm very open to that. I like your thought about having the 5th district strength there. It might really help him in the primaries. Well, I'm going to play this clip of another candidate that is, I think we all know, and it is.
As Attorney General, I was fighting for your constitutional rights. I was the first Attorney General in the nation to stand up and oppose ESG, and I've been a vocal opponent of DEI. And I was the first elected office holder here in Kentucky to endorse President Trump for re-election because I believe in him and I believe in the America First agenda.
Okay, so there we go. So we have Daniel Cameron, and we all know Daniel Cameron. He lost in the gubernatorial race against Andy Beshear, but he is coming out strong. He's already announced his candidacy. He's coming out strong. He has good name recognition. He's positioning himself as a MAGA style candidate with a lot of his rhetoric there, the DEI and the Trump endorsement and all that. And so that's, I think he's very much in one of the well, he's not the lead, but I guess he's one of the leaders in the race. And so what are your thoughts on Cameron?
Well, I think from what I can gather, I believe he's a fine man. And I think that his policy statements are just wonderful. Again, I think, they say that money is the mother's milk of politics. I don't know how much money Mr. Cameron can raise. I think it might be better had he maybe waited myself and serve on as Attorney General and maybe get his foundations a little bit more solidified. When you lose a race, as he did to Andy Beshear, that hurts. I'm not saying that it was all his fault. Kentucky seemingly has a tendency to elect a Democrat governor, but I do believe that with the money that Andy Barr has raised and can raise as a congressman, coupled with what Hal Rogers, and there may be other congressman now. I don't know. I know I've interviewed James Comer. Now, he may stay out of the race completely, and I don't know about the others, Mr. Massey. But I do believe that it'll come down to a lot of money, and this will be an expensive race. And unfortunately, these races have gotten to the point where they are out of hand. They're exorbitant in the amount of money raised and spent. It's be staggering, to say the least. But my little perspective is that I just think maybe I'm overstating it. But I think this endorsement of Hal Rogers, I don't think Hal would have done that had he not seen. I think he's enough of a traditionalist that he has looked at the cards, and I believe that he feels like he has a winning hand here.
Okay. There we go. So you're very much a Andy Barr proponent. Well, we'll see. I think we got this primary season just started, and so we've got a few more candidates we're going to look at. We've got somebody that hasn't thrown his hat in the
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
I do think what is remarkable is that, I mean, you've alluded to it. He has remade the Republican Party's orthodoxy on several issues. I mean, it's no small thing. And I think whether it's on trade, whether it's on this issues of war and peace, it's not just the policy, it's also the language. I mean, the party, to your point, had been a hawkish party. We spoke hawkishly. We acted hawkishly at times. Trump speaks of peace before he speaks of war. Not that he's averse to lighting up our enemies when it matters, ask the Houthi rebels. But he has reset the language of the Republican Party in a way that, you're right, it's not the same language of Bush. It's not the same language of Reagan. And I do think he cares what's in the best interest of the United States. I think the political reset that occurred is that all the intervention, all the war and the intervention that happened around the world, a lot of American people, Republican and Democrat, came to the conclusion that it wasn't worth it, and is there a better way, and do we have to be hemmed in by old ideology?
Okay, that is Scott Jennings. That is Scott Jennings, Kentucky's own Scott Jennings. Now, if you don't know who he is, he's a rising star on CNN, of all places. He's the conservative pundit on many of the CNN panels, and Scott, if you're plugged into local politics, you might know who he is. He's been part of the. I think he was an aide for McConnell at one time. He's part of a major PR firm in this area, but one of the sharpest voices in American conservatism right now, and really taking it to all these liberals on CNN, and it's just fun to watch. Now, he is from Kentucky, and so people have thought, well, maybe he could be running for McConnell's seat, and he's kind of toyed around with it in some indirect ways, and so that would be an interesting, interesting candidacy. However, McConnell connection, he was an aide for McConnell, but he is right now one of the strongest MAGA spokespersons there are on CNN. He's just talking about how Trump has changed the Republican Party. So there you go. Any thoughts on Scott Jennings there, Andrew?
Well, I think that, Tom, this obviously having some kind of a national a situation where your face can be in front of the people. Unfortunately, CNN doesn't have that many viewers as opposed to Fox News or some of the others. But I think that he appears to be very articulate. I like the way he sounds, and he comes across good, and I think he has a good image. Now, here again, I think the final conclusion of the matter will be how people get aligned. I think in the politics can be very messy, and here again, it can be it's not for the faint-hearted, and it's not for the thin-skinned people. I think that the power, of course, that McConnell had, his PACs. I mean, McConnell, unfortunately, in his later years, he didn't support people like that was running against Murkowski up there in Alaska, and Lake out in Arizona was begging for help. It seems like that McConnell wanted to punish anybody that might be opposed to him. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether they just having the name that you might have worked with McConnell. I think, as you spoke so well, Tom, we see a flip-flop here. McConnell became the enemy of Trump. People don't like his votes, how he voted on RFK Jr. and Hegseth and some of the others.
Yeah,
it might be
just
the
silly
kiss
stuff.
of death.
Just petty. He was doing just petty, spiteful votes at the end of the day. I mean, he was like the only person voting against so and so nominee out of all the Republicans. It's like, what? What kind of message are you sending other than just other than you've got a TDS at a real deep level? Is all
Well, Tom, this may come back
just to bite him. Just let me go to one more, because this is our last segment. I want to get to a couple more guys. Let me play this clip of Nate Morris, who's also been talking about running.
We pushed into a Senate seat and turned into a rock star for the base and for the Republican Party, or at least for conservatism and for MAGA. Sounds a lot like J.D. Vance. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, look, I'm proud that JD and I have so much in common, and that's why we became fast friends. I grew up raised by a single mother. My dad left when I was 2. He got locked up for not paying child support. And my mom and I were on food stamps when I was a kid. And like many Kentuckians, we fought, scrapped, battled for everything that we have. 19 of my family members worked in an auto plant. And I'm proud that I was raised in a blue collar working class home. And JD and I also share lineage in Appalachia. My family descends from Morgan County, which is the county next to Breathitt. Yep. And you talk about tough and fighters. You can find it in Appalachia all day long. And, Kentuckians, we've been fighting since the very beginning, since our people came over the Cumberland Gap and established the Commonwealth. We've got it in our DNA to fight. And I think that that's what JD has. That's what he's showcasing. And I think that's one of the reasons why we were kind of kindred spirits, because of those tough backgrounds and the challenges we had early on.
There we go. So Nate Morris. So he's obviously positioning himself as a man of the people, as someone that comes from a working class background and even Eastern Kentucky background, just like J.D. Vance. And so and he is actually on Donald Trump Jr.'s podcast right now. The video I just played, or the audio I just played, is from his podcast. So this is as close to a Trump world endorsement as you can get at this point in the race. So there we go. I think we might have a Trump-blessed candidate, maybe. What do you say, Andrew?
Well, Tom, I certainly I love his story. The story of America is the best place in the world for people that have dreams and want to succeed. That's why we reject socialism, DEI, the idea of equity, that everybody arrives at the same place. America is full of entrepreneurs, inventors, and people that have succeeded. So I love his story. I really do. I can relate to a lot of that. Many people, especially in Appalachia, that have had maybe less than desirable backgrounds, or maybe just working class like my folks were. And people had to rake and scrape to try to get by. And I love his story. Again, being a friend of Donald Trump Jr. is not a liability. I think it's an asset. But here again, I don't know of the name recognition. You would maybe know more about that than myself.
Well, I tell you what, he's really taken off because of that endorsement. He was one of the early contenders for this seat, and he's getting a lot of buzz. And so he's a businessman. He's not a politician. He's more of an outsider. He's very, very much positioning himself as the MAGA guy in the race, where everybody else are going to be probably politicians, Republican politicians in the state that have connections to the McConnell machine. Because just to be a Republican in the state, you were part of the McConnell machine. That's the way it works. McConnell built the machine. And so he's somebody who's coming in outside of that saying, well, okay, I'm going to be a Republican that's all MAGA, and I have no connection with that machine. And matter of fact, this is how bad McConnell is, and I'm going to be the anti-McConnell. So interesting. If that resonates, you've got a strong leader. But so it's why you see Cameron, saying I'm against DEI. Trump endorsed me, and da 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 da. And let me say that we got about 2 minutes left. I'm just going to run through another list of other people that are also running, and so just kind of the also runs. Of course, we mentioned Andy Barr. Let's see, Allison Ball is running. Russell Coleman, Michael Adams, Kelly Craft, who. She ran in the last president or gubernatorial primary. Ryan Quarles, Robert Stivers. I'm not saying these folks have actually announced their candidacy, but there's either talk about it, or they've talked about it, or there's suggestions of it. So that's 10 people on a short list here of who might want to run for this seat. And from all perspectives, from the conservative traditional Republican to the more MAGA Republican, and so we have a good choice, a good menu of options here. So it's going to be a fascinating primary, because it's going to say a lot about where the Republican Party is, about where this country is, about where Kentucky is, and so what say you? As we got about a minute